Welcome back to Subversive Preacher. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a sermon for the fourth Sunday after Pentecost. And one of the ways that I prepare for sermons is to, listen to the readings and to try to hear the many voices that are raising their hands to say, call on me, is to see if I can hear a sentence or a phrase or just a word that captures that reading or excerpt. So, for example, even though there is very lovely action in that liturgical poem between the sunflower and the goldfinch, so much so that I wanted to use something in those images and actions for this sermon, in the end, as so often is true for poems, there erupted a punchline. Rock up on my tiptoes and just barely purse my lips. And what I realized now was being simply glad with such love, if we let it, makes us feel. Such love makes us feel simply glad. So there's that. Now, talk about a lot going on. That reading in Samuel is a riot of words and images and subplots. And of course, our attention gets focused on little David going out with the slingshot to vanquish the ogre Goliath. But the plot is really far more subtle than that event. And by the way, how come the big guys are always depicted as ogres? I got distracted on that for a moment. But in that story from Samuel, it's the horn, as in the sheep's horn. At the beginning of the story, a small detail really, God has Samuel fill a horn with oil. And then at the end of the story, Samuel, the prophet of God, anoints David king with that oil. Oil makes kings and prophets and messiahs. Messiah means literally oily head, anointed one. Samuel is going to anoint a new king because God made a mistake in anointing Saul the king. We anoint, but it's God's action. So in all that mishmash of plots and side stories and updates and past story lines that pop out at us in that reading from Samuel, we anoint, but it's God's action is the punchline. And then in Mark, to put it in language that we understand, the economy of God begins with a penny and ends with trillions and trillions in gold, stocks, bonds, and cash. So there are the sauce reductions I came up with for today's readings. And with all we can say about love, it makes us simply glad. We anoint, but it is God's action, and the beauty of holiness is in compound interest. Which would you preach on? Here's what I came up with. Like Samuel, it comes with an illustrative story. This is a story about a young minister who was only 2.5 years out of seminary, a newlywed with less than 2 years of sobriety from alcohol and drug dependency. He became the solo pastor rector of a small congregation that had been in decline for over a decade. This young priest had always lived in an urban area or university setting, but this new church of his was in a first-ring suburb. It was a little threadbare 1960s brick building on 3 acres of land, where he and his new bride lived in church-owned housing situated on an adjacent 2 acres, all of which were next to an elementary school. So think flat expanse of cut grass. His neighbor in the nearest home, which was down a long drive and across a little creek, or crick as they said, could be seen each warm weather morning on his hands and knees wearing a pith helmet while picking impurities from his immaculate lawn. In short, the young minister found himself a stranger in a strange land. He was used to lots of action, with many people in and out of church all day long, but now he suddenly found himself in what some would call splendid isolation. To him, though, both highly extroverted and urban-oriented, it was just isolation. He became depressed. It was the Cold War, and there was an arms race going on between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the first of many waves of scissoring the social safety net and dismantling public and affordable housing was taking place as economic and social conservatives smelled blood in the water. It seemed to him as if all his former colleagues and seminary classmates were all on the front lines fighting the good fight while he was in the land of cut grass. He continued to feel sidelined, isolated, and depressed. One day he found himself in the empty sanctuary, kneeling at the wooden altar rail, lost in prayer that was part lament, part resigned whine, and part accusatory finger-pointing anger. A voice responded to his prayer, though it was not an actual voice. It was more like one of those impossible to describe thoughtless thoughts or wordless declarations that enter into our consciousness from neither the brain nor the gut. But however, or whatever it was, it quietly said to the young minister, "Open your eyes. Look around. See. You are on the front line, not the sideline, and you are not alone. Stop trying to do things alone. There's help all around if you will listen and see." So the young man began to listen more and to look more and to pry open his heart and his mind a little bit more. And well, doggone, what he saw and heard and recognized was true community. Suddenly, he saw those same people who had seemed so strange and different from him in politics and lifestyle as people who could teach him about love. They loved each other, and they would love him if he would allow it. He might even learn to love himself a little more in the process. He looked around and discovered that while the God talk was different and the political assumptions were different and the core values that he received from the gospel were the same core values that this new community received from the gospel. And strangely, what happened over time as they shared community together was that both their God talk and politics evolved for both of them. Even as his ivory tower ideas about church became softer, more earthy, more open. Having arrived at that congregation, imagining that he would stay only long enough to learn his new trade, for that's too often what new clergy do in little congregations in decline, he actually stayed there 7 years, and together they thrived. So here's the point. We can put a seed in soil, fertilize it, and water the thing with great care, all the while imagining that we have grown a beautiful plant. But all we did was to put in place the fortunate assortment of elements that allow the new life and growth. We are neither the authors of the new life, nor are we the agents of its growth. Life and growth are well beyond our control. What seems so ordinary, planting a seed and watching it grow, is actually so beyond us. It is a mystery without measure, and we need to muster far deeper awe and reverence for something that we so often take for granted. Now, I don't know about you, but like that young man in the story, in fact, exactly like that young man in the story, I assume way too much responsibility for life and growth, for success and hope, even for failure and loss. And when we do that, we damage our hearing. And our vision becomes blurred and hazy. And our thoughts race towards self-sufficiency, and our imagination becomes very self-preoccupied. I'd be so bold as to say that all of us on some level have adopted a stance in life as the star at the center of our own universe. We start talking to ourselves in a way that amounts to a me and God private conversation. It's as if God and us are the last tag team left between success and failure. It ain't so. Seeds have been planted we didn't even know about. And we are surrounded by growth we haven't even seen yet. There has been money invested we didn't even earn that will pay dividends for us that we can't even predict. There is a power greater than ourselves, so much greater than we are, that has music we haven't heard yet, growth we haven't even imagined, life we don't know about, and opportunities we have nothing to do with other than to take them. So we need more humility. Humility that will allow us to hear more and see more and become more open. Now that's what I heard in those readings. From the poet today, with all we can say about love, it makes us simply glad. So let us allow ourselves the gladness of being steeped in the love of community. From today's prophet, we anoint, but it's God's action. In the end, we are not the source of life and growth. And from Jesus, the beauty of holiness is in compound interest. So start investing in the economy of God. Thanks for coming back. Peace be with you.